Okay, well, hello everybody. Welcome to the Cardinal Quarter panel. This one focused on science, technology, and engineering opportunities. I'm super excited to have four former fellows with us today to talk a little bit about their experiences working again in opportunities through Cardinal Quarter in science and technology. Today we have Alyssa, Kendall, Cooper, and Danya. And first, I'd love to just let them have a chance to tell a little bit about themselves, the Cardinal Quarter they completed, and the work they did during their Cardinal Quarter. And I guess I will kick it off to Alyssa.
Cool, yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Elisa, and I'm a sophomore right now studying CS and poli-sci. Yeah, I'm on campus right now, but I'm originally from Orlando, Florida. And this past summer, I got a SENSA fellowship where I was meant to work in Columbia, but it was obviously remote due to COVID. But I worked for Build Change, which is a nonprofit that focuses on disaster relief after natural disasters. And so we were specifically in partnership with IBM working on an AI for construction supervision project. Yeah, and it was a super great opportunity. I learned a lot, like even though it was obviously different than I expected because it was made remote. Yeah, the meetings were really great and learned a lot that was needed to like perform these like construction quality checks. But yeah, anyone else?
Cooper, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Cooper. I was a junior when I started my leave of absence in the spring. I had a really weird Cardinal Quarter experience where I kind of transitioned from a pre-designed to a self-designed. The first organization that I worked with was this really cool like music mentorship company that hosted events where they would have like college kids and people from the music industry come in and discuss together. So yeah, they basically said, we're having trouble getting kids to come to Zoom meetings, so we need you to bring everyone. So I brought a bunch of Stanford kids because they were the college kids that I knew. And then with the beginning of the summer and George Floyd happening, they decided that they wanted to transition the company to serve specifically low access college kids and sort of like lower privilege college kids. And they said, we no longer have any interest in running these programs at Stanford. And so we actually don't have any more interest in working with you. So I transitioned at the end of July to I basically ran down our list of like organizations that were down to work with us, and I switched to this ed tech startup where I was building like a resource portal for managing personnel and personnel tracking histories and that kind of thing. So I did like front end development for the rest of the summer.
Awesome. Kendall, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kendall. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a junior right now studying Earth Systems and CSRE. So that's comparative studies in race and ethnicity. And this past summer, I was supposed to be in San Francisco, but I was remote in DC working for the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF. They're kind of a nonprofit that works with general conservation goals, but I was working on the water team. And my project specifically was working on this new kind of digital platform known as OpenET, which is basically this kind of massive data collecting platform that brings water data and water use to the hands of kind of users and water managers, farmers, policymakers, people who really want that water data. So I helped manage that project, which brought together collaborators from NASA and the Desert Research Institute, as well as EDF. It was a really awesome way to kind of see collaborators work in this kind of technical space with kind of really wide-ranging, important conservation applications. I also ended up doing a lot of work on their kind of equity and inclusion and justice side of things, given my background in race studies. So I worked pretty extensively on those teams too, and that was an awesome experience.
Awesome. And then Danya, last but not least, would love to hear you introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Danya. I am a senior studying symbolic systems, and my Cardinal Quarter was the CS for Social Good Fellowship. I was placed at Tarjimli, which is a tech nonprofit. It's created a mobile app that connects volunteer translators with refugees, humanitarians, aid workers around the world. And officially, I served as corporate social responsibility partnerships manager, but unofficially, I like to say I was like Mary Poppins pulling out different hats way out of the bag, which works great for me because I'm used to wearing multiple hats with Simsys. But like some specific things, I worked on creating a corporate social responsibility program, finding corporate clients who would want to partner with Tarjima to do some volunteer employee engagement programs. Beyond this, I also did some web development, ran some social media campaigns, and launched a program, which I'm excited to share more with you guys later.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I'm sure all of you have really exciting highlights from the summer. So it would be great if you could go and share one or maybe two, if you can't choose, of highlights from your Cardinal Quarter. And I don't know if someone just wants to jump in or however.
I could go. So of course it was like super cool to just like hit the ground running and get to kind of pull from my knowledge. I had done the Philanthropy Fellowship with the Haas Center the year before. And so that's something that Tarjinli was super excited about tapping into, finding different pathways for funding. But I think like the two things that like really stand out to me, like towards the end of my fellowship, there was a fire at a refugee camp called Moria. And this is like where our founders kind of started their journey with language justice and creating Tarjimli. And so while it was like incredibly tragic, it was really kind of eye-opening to be able to connect with different people on my team and really ground ourselves in the work that we're doing and kind of remind ourselves of the urgency of what we do. And then another highlight was, also working with the team in my final presentation with them. We played like this game called Drawful. And I think at the time, I was like, oh my God, like, I don't really know if I did anything, but having to go through the final presentation, like really cemented these things for me. And so if you can like do this final presentation at the end of your experience, is a really good way to like go and realize like how much that you've been able to learn, grow from it. It's really humbling to be able to do that with your team.
Yeah, I think to jump in on kind of this learning aspect and team kind of cooperation, collaboration, a highlight for me was always being able in those project management calls to interact with kind of leading researchers from a bunch of different organizations and fields. One of which actually kind of the NASA guy ended up being a Stanford grad from my program, our systems. So that was really cool to connect with him. But it always felt really cool to be hearing from kind of these experts, these leaders in their field who are putting their skill set to this really kind of specific project that had such kind of interdisciplinary, that's a buzzword, but really kind of interdisciplinary impacts and kind of possibilities for positive good for the environment and for people and communities. So I always love those project management calls. I got to directly interact with those people. On the more kind of fun side, I also, another highlight of mine was kind of playing trivia with the other interns. EDF did a great job of connecting us during our free time or kind of during lunch breaks with our intern class. And so my cohort was actually, it's pretty big, but we were actually interacting on a fairly normal basis. And we'd play games together during lunch or do trivia, get to know you type stuff. And that was actually really fun.
Yeah, I guess just to jump in, Danya and Kendall have kind of said the same kind of thing, but I think since it was like a remote kind of internship, like Zoom became like the highlight and things like that. So even like there are ways to make like Zoom meetings a lot of fun. And yeah, like I really enjoyed, we'd have our weekly meetings with our IBM partners and like those were really eye-opening. It was good to get like feedback from them on like the work that we were doing. And yeah, I think those were always really interesting. But I also just really loved like my one-on-one meetings with my mentor and like we have a really good relationship now. And it was just like a lot of fun to like form this virtual connection with someone that is like very meaningful. So yeah, it seems like pretty small things, but like a lot of them kind of, yeah, ended up making it a great experience.
Yeah, like I said, I had a wacky one. I think Zoom was actually a low light since we were hosting these events that were supposed to be really personable and like networking events, but they just didn't work in this new format pretty much at all. So I think one of the best things about this summer for me was that I got to experience two drastically different working places and got a much better sense of how I actually want to keep proceeding in my career. And it sort of inspired me to stay out of Stanford, honestly. And having a better sense of what I want to do, I've been much more confident, like actually going into the working world and staying in places where I know I can do the best. So that was the highlight for me, was actually getting a sense of myself.
Yeah, Cooper, you kind of lead me to my next question for you all, which, how has completing your Cardinal Quarter, this 10-week experience, coming back from that, changed the way that you think about yourself, your future, the world? Just keen to think, like, what have been the learning takeaways or ways that the experience has changed you?
I can just hop in on that just to continue what I was saying. I think like a lot of these organizations are very excited to host kids, but not all of them are prepared to host kids. And so I think like it was a really good primer on like basically finding out very soon, like, is this a good match for me? Is this a place where I'm actually being maximized and where I can maximize the company? So I think like really the upshot for me was that I feel like I have much better context about the working world. I have a much better sense of what I want to do when I do return to Stanford. So I'm on my flex quarter right now, and I like knew exactly which class I was going to take, and I've never had a plan for a quarter at Stanford. So I think that was the best thing about it, was just this notion that planning is actually a very crucial part of your career. Like before you even begin somewhere, just knowing exactly where you want to go will save you a lot of work on the back end.
To elaborate with like what Cooper was saying, yeah, I feel like when you're working at a startup, like as I was, or a nonprofit, there's going to be limited resources to a certain extent. And so like he was saying, not all organizations might, have the kind of infrastructure to support, students working. But this also has like an incredible beauty in that you're able to kind of like take ownership of what you want to learn and just like hit the ground running. And so it's kind of like changed the way that I think about like how action needs to take place. Like I used to think like, oh, you have to have kind of like this plan, and you really have to like, take a lot of time to make sure that you're kind of doing it right. It's almost counterintuitive, right? Because it's like social impact. You really want to make sure that what you're doing is right. And of course, like, as long as you know that your heart is in the right place, I learned about myself that like, it's better to take initiative and to move fast than to second guess yourself. And if you ever are, then like, just, it's really important to like ask for help and to advocate for yourself as you're advocating for other people.
Yeah, I just like to add to that. I agree with Cooper and Danya on this point. That's definitely something I noticed this summer. Like my mentor, the people I was working with were like super, super overworked. And I think that's just the nature of some of these organizations, that there's just like, people have to wear a lot of hats and do a lot more work. And that's because they're really passionate about it. So they really go above and beyond, which was great to see and like be influenced by these people. But yeah, I do think it like changed my perspective of like how hard I think it is to like make change, like have social impact and everything like that. So in a more like overarching grand sense, I think it did give me like a sort of a perspective shift of finally like working within one of these organizations and seeing like what that actually looks like. But then as for me, and how it's like affected my like Stanford career, I think before coming to Stanford, I'd like never written a line of code or anything. So I think this first summer after was a really like gave me a lot of self-confidence, I think, taught me a lot of things, and showed me that like it is possible to work in these spaces. And so I think it was also great learning experience, and I think taught me a lot of definitely gave me a lot of self-confidence about my ability to continue working in the space in the years that come.
Yeah, I actually think I learned a lot about the environmental field during my experience. I think it gave me an incredible perspective on kind of what nonprofit NGO type actors are doing on the environmental sphere. And it taught me a lot about kind of how larger mainstream environmental thinkers are what kind of work they're doing. My work, a lot of my work, like I said, involves kind of the equity and justice and inclusion type stuff. And I learned a whole lot about how much work the environmental field still has to do in that space, kind of how urgent that kind of work is, what the major gaps are, what is needed. And in that sense, kind of to go off what Lisa said, I found a lot of agency, a lot of space to bring my own expertise, my own academic background, kind of how I can be valuable and what kind of voice I can bring to a largely kind of white mainstream environmental nonprofit that hasn't really engaged with issues of social and racial equity before, and has kind of stuck very, very strictly to the environmentalism that is kind of exclusive at times. So it is, I think, can be validating in a lot of ways to know that, you know, your expertise or your area of intersection or area of academic focus is of value to these kinds of organizations, that they haven't heard these things before, that your perspective is a novel thing that will push them in better directions. So I learned a lot about the field itself and a lot about how they go about things and also what they're missing, and how people like us can be kind of positive agents for that.
Wow, thank you all for sharing. That's really exciting. I'm curious, you know, Danya shared about like learning how to take initiative, Cooper, the importance of planning, whether these learnings were things that kind of slowly built up over the internship, or if there were some key moments or meetings with mentors where everything kind of clicked, and how those learnings took shape for y'all over your summers. I know it's kind of a hard question, so we'll give time to think. I think moving on to another kind of topic was, you know, before you all decided or finalized your opportunity or organization, thinking about, you know, Kendall, for you, like what made you choose EDF, and how you went about evaluating different organizations and opportunities for all 4 of you panelists.
I can jump in. So I think that my first answer kind of leads into the second one. Let's see if I can make it work. Okay, so a really salient learning experience for me was like, I think it was like the first week, you know, my boss laughed me and was like, hey, like, can you join this meeting? And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. And then I jumped in and I realized like, oh my God, I have no context. But it turns out this meeting was like the Full Circle Fund. It's this group of different tech leaders, philanthropy leaders in the area that partner with a nonprofit, and they kind of like give advice for strategy and how we could like sell our different programs and whatnot. And so I joined, and of course, like they're throwing around like all these words like sales collateral, and I don't know, like I don't even remember all the other stuff. There's so much going on. So I like slacked my boss in the meeting. I'm like, hey, like, what does this word mean? And then he was just like the nicest ever about it, like never made me feel like an idiot, even though of course, like that's how I was feeling. And I think that this was like, it kind of embodied for me that like all the work that I had done in the interview, like, and preparing for the interview paid off, because something that I was really trying to keep in mind is that, you know, like while they're interviewing me, I'm also interviewing them. And, you know, you can go to an organization that you think like sounds the coolest, but like if you're not in a culture that's going to facilitate your growth so that you can act, then, you know, like what are you really doing there? And so something that I would really advise for people preparing for interviews is like, don't be afraid to like ask questions or do your research and ask questions that show that you've done your research. But then also like, I don't know, ask kind of like different questions, that atypical questions. So maybe like, what's the worst thing that's happened to you at this company? Or like, tell me about your best friend in the company. These atypical questions will kind of give you atypical answers, and you know, you'll get a very different feel based off of this answer. Obviously in interviews, people are going to be trying to show their best sides, but like you, through these questions, you can kind of like start to see what the different cultures at this organization might be. So yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, to hop in on that, I think in terms of evaluating different opportunities, I totally agree in the sense that, you know, you can often kind of get a sense of the culture of a place when you have a conversation with someone. And I don't mean necessarily just kind of the interview questions and kind of transactional, but like try to have a conversation with them and actually getting to know them as a person. I strongly believe that these kinds of opportunities are made or broken by your supervisor and kind of who you are working under directly. I was lucky enough to have the most amazing supervisor. She was incredibly supportive. She brought my interest into the work. She asked me what I wanted to work on and made sure I had opportunities to do so. She was incredibly kind and generous, but also pushed me and challenged me. And so I think I didn't necessarily think EDF as an organization was where I would end up. I actually kind of thought other orgs would make more sense for me given kind of other programmatic things, but I actually think it was an amazing opportunity, largely because of my supervisor, and that's because we were able to connect on kind of her passions, her interests, where she ended up in her career, and how that connected with mine. And so I think you want to be on the lookout, obviously, for organizations that kind of pique your interest, that fill a space in the policy world or the NGO space, wherever you are, that I think you'd want to learn about. I think for me, I was really eager to learn about mainstream kind of environmental nonprofits, since that was kind of the space I wanted to enter. But in terms of once you're in that space, I think it largely comes down to, the people you're meeting, the culture, as Danya said, and the supervisor that you're working under. So I'd be really cognizant of that when you're talking to people.
Just to hop in on that quickly, because I had two very different supervision experiences. In the first company, they really gave me zero help. And I was totally okay with that for a while and didn't think it was a problem until I was effectively terminated for it. They had me building an entire new website for them, which is fine. I've done that. They had me building an entire new graphics pack for them. I had never done that, but I was hoping for some help. And they were having me design this mentorship series of events and bringing every single member of the audience like individually to them, which was like largely friends, people in my groups, like that kind of thing. So they swapped this event series from every 2 weeks to every 1 week. And I was working all this overtime, and we had a 1-hour meeting every day. So I figured that was an open enough line of communication that I would effectively be able to voice my concerns or anything else during that time. But I think that in large part, like kind of the things that I had to say were lost during that time. And I never really established a direct line of communication with anyone because I couldn't figure out really who was my boss. No one was helping me. People didn't really give me direction on what I was doing. Like these are things that I could have totally solved, that I should have solved, but that I really wasn't aware of and that wasn't really like fully trained on before. So I think, yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience because I didn't get any feedback whatsoever, positive or negative, except for these events are great. Let's do them every week instead of every 2 weeks. And then you're fired, basically. So yeah, it was kind of a wacky one, that first experience. And I was like working like crazy during that time, and I had a ton of output, but it didn't end up being useful to the company. So in the second company I worked for, I actually did a lot less work. I was just building this website. But I established clear lines of communication with my boss, with my supervisor, and with other people in the team who had jobs like mine. And it made for a way different experience that was a lot more personable, a lot more helpful, a lot easier, and ultimately a lot more educational, despite being less work. So what I would encourage is know where you can make the most impact and establish clear lines of communication. But yeah, it was definitely very different experiences, and supervisors are critical.
Cool. Yeah. I had less crazy experience, but I can jump in on that. Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to pick and decide like what it is that you want to do with your summer, especially if you're still trying to figure out what you even want to do, which like you guys, some of you might be in that boat. For me, like I knew I wanted to do something that was like policy and tech, and this was like seemed like the perfect opportunity because it was pretty split. At least going in, the plan they had was going to be like pretty 50-50 policy and tech. But then, and honestly, a big reason I've never been to Latin America. I really wanted to go to Colombia, and obviously that didn't end up happening. So another thing I would say is like sometimes you don't. It's not necessarily what you expect, but it might even be better or at least different in a lot of ways. And even because of the things that had come up as a result of COVID, I ended up working on a completely different project than they had proposed, just because of their needs had changed and nonprofits' needs changed really quickly. And so I ended up completely doing tech stuff and not instead of the policy stuff that had been like proposed. But I think that was a great experience. And in fact, like the new project I worked on, I learned so much, and it wouldn't even have existed without COVID. So I would say that like, I think that sometimes it's, yeah, I think good to like take a leap, or just, yeah, look at your options and do something that might be out of your comfort zone, or like realize that it might be not necessarily what you expect. And that's happened with some friends of mine. Like, and I know that, yeah, for example, one did like this solar car internship all summer, and that made her realize that she does not want to do engineering. But that's still valuable, and it's still a good experience. So I think, yeah, I think that just look at where you think you'll learn a lot, and what might be meaningful. And like in the end, I think you will. Like Cooper's experience, even when there's like some drastic shift you don't expect, that's like maybe even a greater learning experience. But yeah.
Thank you all for sharing. Yeah, kind of bridging, Elisa, what you just mentioned about like this project that you weren't expecting, that you totally got to like pivot and work on a ton. Would love to hear more about that, and more broadly for all the panelists, like a cool project that they got to support on over the summer, or like a cool skill that they got to revamp or really hone in on over the summer.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. I just like, I guess I can continue the point. Yeah. So I ended up working. It was supposed to be like working in policy with the Colombian government and trying to implement implement a new program. But what it ended up being was this project that started just like a couple weeks before I got there, and it was they were working in partnership with IBM to implement an AI for construction supervision project. And it started in Nepal. And essentially the goal is after natural disasters, just by taking a picture of a wall or rebar or any other construction object, you can tell whether it's structurally sound. And then the goal is to be able to retrofit homes so that like, should another natural disaster come, they'll be safe and protected, and like people will have safe housing. And I thought that was super, super cool. I definitely didn't know anything about construction going in, but I learned a lot about that, which was unexpected. And I didn't know much machine learning before, but that was obviously necessary for this project. So huge learning experience. Yeah, none of those terms or or concepts were things I knew going in. But I think I probably learned more doing that than I would have from the like policy program.
This was, sorry, the original question was something that we didn't expect to learn or work on, is that correct?
Or any like just expanding on any project that you worked on that was really exciting, or a skill that you really got to develop or hone in on.
Got it. Okay, yeah, no, there are a ton of different projects I worked on, some expected, some unexpected. But one that I certainly wasn't expecting to work on, that I felt like was one of the more rewarding ones, was actually working really closely with a team that was getting off the ground new initiatives in a newly launched geography is what they call it. On the water team, kind of there are different teams working on different geographies. So there's one in California, one in Arizona, some in the Mid-Atlantic, and there's one getting off the ground in the Pacific Northwest. And so I worked really closely with that team actually to spearhead some research efforts on kind of the equity and kind of racial equity and environmental justice concerns in the area. And so I actually did a lot of research on kind of tribal issues and how they relate to water. And so I learned a lot about kind of the really complex world of tribal laws, federal laws in terms of water allocation and water rights. Again, something that I didn't expect to be working on, something that I didn't know anything about before, but something that is incredibly complex and incredibly important for policy to understand, and that the environmental world is like still grappling with and wrestling with. And so I got kind of, knee deep in all this research, became somewhat of like a little expert on kind of how tribal water rights work in the Pacific Northwest, and what that means for environmental organizations trying to intervene and make positive impact in the area. So again, something I definitely didn't expect to be doing, something I got pulled into because my supervisor noted that I was really interested kind of in equity and racial equity, and so kind of tapped me to help this one team in this one area. But again, something that was really unexpected and really valuable for me to learn.
To kind of piggyback off of Kendall's sentiment that like the unexpected opportunities sometimes end up being kind of like the most magical. Towards the end of my internship, I was like trying to help support like recruiting volunteer translators, and we're working with this corporate social responsibility initiative, seeing that hypotheses like weren't really working out. And so then I had this idea of like, what if we actually like used like college student ambassadors to help recruit volunteer translators. And I spoke with our team. They were super excited, something that they had thought of too, but hadn't had the bandwidth. And so, they were really supportive of me going out and trying this. And so I got a grant from a different organization to kind of help launch this. And so I was managing a team of 5 college students. And it was really rewarding in that, like, I wasn't kind of in this position of like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, to all of a sudden like trying to help other people figure out like what they were doing. And so it just like, it all kind of came together super nicely. I mean, obviously like there's a lot of turmoil with like, some students like with their health issues and whatnot, but like really kind of pushing myself out of my comfort zone kind of like enabled me to kind of help the discomfort of other people. And I don't know, it was super cool. And I'm really grateful that I was able to work with such a diligent and resilient team there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what I was expecting to learn this summer. I definitely was expecting to learn more about mentorship and career pathways and the music industry and that kind of stuff. But things don't go as planned. So it goes. And yeah, I ended up learning a ton about education policy, and I thought that was really, really cool. Yeah, I basically emailed, 5 weeks into a 10-week program, I emailed every single organization on the self-designed fellowships list, and I said, who can employ me next week so I don't lose my stipend? EdTech got back to me. They were the one out of every single one on the list, and they said, we would love to have you. We need a React developer. And I was like, awesome, I love EdTech. And it ended up being this thing that I'm now really passionate about and that I love working with. So yeah, I've tried to keep this going. Helping teach a class this quarter actually with Elisa, CS and Social Good Studio, which I guess I was doing before this summer, but still great to be continuing education work. Yeah, something that I didn't really expect to be, didn't expect to be my North Star. And now I am really, really interested and invested in education policy. And it feels like kind of one of the better ways to make a difference, at least from where I stand. So yeah, thought that was super rad and very, very unexpected.
That's awesome. Cooper, for you specifically, I'm interested in, you mentioned like having to do this transition from one fellowship to another and how you kind of reset in that like week between, and how you were able to like make changes, or what happened differently so you were able to like have such a better experience the second time around.
Sure. Yeah. So it wasn't a week between. I was dropped on Monday, and on Friday I had another organization. I guess that's a week between. But anyway, yeah, I was literally emailing these orgs nonstop between then. And it was a tough transition to make for sure. But the nice thing was arriving at the second place, I guess, like not just having a sense of what I had done wrong, but also having a sense of what I would need to do things right. And so it was really easy for me to go into that environment and go, hey, I need a line of contact with someone that I can update with consistently, and that who knows the work of this company well, and that who has a sense of what I'm doing well. And I also need a line of contact with someone who is like actually overseeing my program, who might have overseen a program like this in the past. I just need to, yeah, I mean, consistent contact was pretty much the biggest thing that I walked into the second one knowing that I needed. But also I had a sense of what I was seeking to gain from it, which was actually like a skill set, but also something to put in a portfolio to make things tangible. So the nice thing about that second company was that they said, we need all kinds of things. Like, what do you need from us? Got very lucky with that. That wasn't something that I chose, but that wasn't a question that I could have answered unless I had totally flamed out in the first one. So yeah, it was a wacky transition, but it ended up being a really critical educational experience for me. And like, yeah, I don't know. Since then, it's very cool, like being in the working world and having a sense of what you need and what you're looking for. Because at Stanford, I didn't have a sense of that, and as a result, I didn't really have a sense of what I wanted at Stanford. So when we go back, I'll have a better sense. But yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I think that kind of leads me into my final question before we open up for any questions that the audience has, which is just if any of y'all would like to share a positive experience that maybe you didn't expect. So I know some people mentioned like fun Zoom calls with their coworkers. I think just a nice, sweet way to end our session today. And I
Would
guess,
you mind?
oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Would you mind just rephrasing the question, just quick?
Oh yeah, I was asking the panelists for maybe a highlight or something like a silver lining that they maybe didn't expect going into what was a different Cardinal Quarter than normal.
Could I also make like an additional questions to see like if any of the panelists could answer?
Yeah, we'll definitely have some time right after this
Oh,
for
okay.
audience.
I'll wait then.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
But
Just some things.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just something sweet and small. That just pumped to my head, very unexpected. Yeah, my organization actually kind of one day in the mail, there was kind of a little care package that my organization had sent to all the interns. I think they were just as disappointed that we weren't going to be in the office. And I think that's something that was palpable throughout my entire experience, is that they were genuinely sorry that they weren't able to have the kind of the normal interpersonal interaction that the fellowship usually brings. So yeah, they sent kind of like a t-shirt and a mug. And then for our final kind of graduation kind of little Zoom party thing, people like wore their t-shirts and you had like a yearbook quote that you submitted alongside your picture. So it was very kind of a lot of ways to connect, very kind of hospitable, and the intern coordinators put a lot of effort into it. So again, there's a lot of support, not only professionally and kind of in your actual output and your work, but actually kind of supporting you as a person through kind of what we all know have been really weird times and feeling isolated. So a silver lining in the sense that the company did a really good job, or did a really good job in kind of supporting us as interns and fellows.
Yeah, no, just to bounce off of that, yeah, I had a similar experience. I didn't even expect it. One day in the mail, they sent like masks for like bill change masks, which was kind of cute. And yeah, there were even the things that I thought were like wouldn't have been that I was looking forward to that didn't end up coming to fruition. Like I was looking forward to going to Colombia and speaking Spanish, but we still had like our Colombia team meetings in Spanish, which were like a lot of fun. And so I still got, they definitely, I kind of like Kendall was saying, regretted the fact that it wasn't in person and tried to like make the most of it. So there were a lot of like those kind of things. And the meetings were, yeah, very team bonding and things like that.
I feel like I've talked too much, but yeah, it was definitely I don't know. I kind of had an answer to this one earlier, so I'm gonna let us just move on to the next one.
I can jump in real quick, Cooper. So I think my company, my non-Tarjim lead was always like primarily like a remote organization, and so there wasn't like too much of a difficulty with the transition or anything. Of course, we were like supposed to meet up and stuff, but they did also send a mask, which that was like a really nice touch. And I guess I was not expecting to like be the one to start like a social distancing Slack channel, but yeah, I don't know. I was just like, I was on this call one time and I was like, wait, like you also love the Great British Baking Show? Like I love the Great British Baking Show. And so like really realizing that there's like humans behind the screen, like I know, big shocker. But I don't know, it's just like those like little moments of connection that really, really go a long way and keep you grounded while, you know, we're all somewhat isolated.
Thank you all for sharing. Yeah, if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask the panelists at this time.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just like to ask the panelists, like even though the impact of the overall pandemic, what do you say like was the thing that most benefited you out of your Cardinal Quarter experience?
Did you ask what task or what part of the experience?
Well, I mean more like any element, like be it like a skill or just like anything that would you say like most benefited you from all the experience?
I developed kind of like I don't want to say unhealthy addiction to LinkedIn, but like I never used LinkedIn before. So as soon as I started to like learn more about it and actually use it, I think that's something that was like unexpected and I think can serve a long way beyond just like the context of where I was working. Cause like I was primarily using LinkedIn to find like new leads, new funding leads. But then kind of like learning to adapt to the way that I network from like, that we all network in person to online and not I think I had always been kind of like resentful of LinkedIn, but like making my peace with it one and then learning like, well, actually this can open a lot of doors wherever you go.
Yeah, no, I mean, the remote circumstances were unideal for a lot of reasons, but I think given that we were all kind of on our computers and remote, I think I did learn and benefit from a necessity to self-advocate more, to communicate better, to be kind of asking for work for myself when I wanted it, being able to set boundaries when I wanted and needed them. And I think almost being remote and being kind of on your own and having to communicate through the channels that are available to you forces you to kind of self-advocate in a very intentional way, in a way that, you are starting to actually voice concerns when they arise or voice how you're feeling during your work or about your work. And that's kind of on you to do that with the means that are available to you rather than kind of expecting people to pick up on that while they're around you. I think it takes a certain level of intentionality is what I'm saying. And so I think I actually benefited from forcing myself to do that a little bit more. And I think it'll serve me going forward in terms of kind of very intentional, very deliberate, very consistent kind of, as people were saying, lines of communication that are open between you and your coworkers.
LinkedIn for sure. I would also say initiative. Organizations are very cool, very neat to work with, but they are not always looking out for you and they're not always looking out for how you can help them best. So something that they will never really tell you to do is to actually like bring them ideas. Or I mean, maybe some will. It definitely sounds like some people's did, but many organizations, especially like nonprofits, don't really have the bandwidth to be constantly dreaming up new stuff for you to do. And so I think like having a sense of how you can help most and having a sense of how you want to help most were probably the most critical skill that I learned.
I don't have too much to add. I would like just echo what Kendall was saying. I think like things are like times are changing and even like without COVID, there's a lot of like companies that are remote anywho. And I think I think I learned how to work in that kind of environment and like with all the things that brings. And I think that's super valuable.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Actually, I would like to ask like Danya and Cooper to maybe expand a little bit on like how they use LinkedIn. I think for me, LinkedIn is like a nebulous platform of like career, whatever that means. And so yeah, I would like to know more about it.
I think for me, well, I was using LinkedIn with a specific goal with my role, but like once I started to use it for myself, some of the things that I would do would be kind of like scoping out like what are some possible career pathways I'd want. So something I would do is like, I don't know, like I was thinking for a second about like product management. And so I would look up like product manager Stanford, and then a bunch of results would come up, and then I would connect with them and send a request for an informational interview. And so just like finding like different mentors in different places, not just Stanford and whatnot. I haven't really gotten into the whole like posting stuff. I guess it depends. Like some people are trying to become like influencers. I guess LinkedIn is like a really big place for influencing. I had no idea before. It's kind of entertaining. But yeah, it's also nice to like be able to see like, you know, where your old friends went and catch up that way. But yeah, I think I primarily really advocate for like finding informational interviews. And there's actually a lot of people out there that really, really want to help. And you can often tell in their bio, there'll be people saying like, hey, like, you know, I'm here to uplift communities and whatnot. So yeah, just keep on the lookout for that. And make sure just to keep your page like pretty updated. I think before I was kind of slacking on like making sure it's in line with my resume, but oftentimes different places will now like cross-reference your resume with your LinkedIn presence to make sure that like you're being authentic or whatnot.
Before LinkedIn, I had my whole life in like a Trello board, which was terrible. But I think LinkedIn, what it enabled me to do is like actually get a sense of like what I want my narrative to be and how I want to build my narrative from here forward. So like on top of being like a fantastic connection tool, like Danya said, I do think it's a really good place to build a brand in like a less kind of gross way than you might see for like an influencer on Instagram or something. Like I've never posted on LinkedIn. I've never like announced a job change or anything. And I still think it's awesome just to return there and go, all right, like where is my career going? Like who am I presenting myself as and who am I presenting myself to? So it's just a really good thinking and working space is what I've found. And you don't need to be an influencer, but heck, if you want to be an influencer, you're going to go far. So yeah, it's more powerful than many people give it credit for.
Yeah, I'd also just like to jump in on this because I find it funny because I used to be the biggest LinkedIn hater before this winter break. And finally I caved and I got one. And I agree with Danya and Cooper that it's actually like, yeah, that you can do a lot with it. And with another nonprofit I work with, it's similarly to what Danya was saying, it's a great space to like reach out to potential funders. So like yeah, I think it's it's great to form those kind of connections and get funding for like social good type things, which you wouldn't think of when you think of LinkedIn, but there are certain like, it's really just a platform to connect with people that you wouldn't normally like have access to. So in some ways it's like more of an equalizer, I guess. That might be a stretch to call LinkedIn an equalizer, but if you guys see what I'm saying. So.
Awesome. Any last questions?
I guess I can ask another one. What's the size and scale of like the places you guys worked with? Like maybe rough estimates?
Yeah, so I worked again with the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF, and it's actually like a pretty big environmental nonprofit. It's considered kind of one of the biggest kind of, you know, mainstream type large global nonprofits that work in this space. So I believe the nonprofit had close to 700 employees worldwide. It had something like 5 to 7 offices, many of them international. And so, yeah, you get the sense, at least when I was working there, that it's a sprawling organization that had a lot of different operations going and a lot of different smaller teams broken into them. So, you know, I worked with a lot of people and got to meet a lot of people, but there were a lot of people that I didn't even, you know, get to even converse with. So it was an experience, a good one, but a unique one, I'd say, in the environmental space to be working with such a huge organization.
Yeah, I was on like the complete opposite end of that size spectrum, I guess. I don't know, like there's like 7 people. I just like counted them on my hand that were working there. Just like really crazy, like considering like how much impact I believe Tarjimli has. Yeah. So if you're joining a small organization, though, like you get a really big chance to like connect with the different people at your organization, but at the same time, like not, because like they just have so much work to do. Yeah, so it's kind of like a give and take there.
Yeah. As for me, I think it really felt like a small organization in terms of like the team I was working with, but like they'll change is like a few hundred employees, so they're like yeah, pretty decently sized. But it definitely like felt like in terms of the people you actually interact with, like a small team.
The first one I worked for, there were 4 people there, and each of them was doing like 5 separate things. And so it was a little fragmented. But the second one that I worked for, they had about 25, I think, and they were actually able to do teams, and they weren't spread thin across their tasks. So yeah, I don't really know what the insight there is, because I'm sure that like there are organizations with 5 people working for them that are absolutely crushing it out there. But yeah, I will say it's a good thing to know the size of the organization that you're working with and the share of their work that they would like you personally to do. And if you'll have help.
Awesome. Well, if there are no other questions, then I guess that closes out this session. I want to say thank you to all the panelists. Super helpful, and I'm excited for all the people that are going to be able to watch the recording later as well. And yeah, I hope everyone has a good rest of their week too.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you,
so much.
Ethan.